So, as I said, we are joined today by our guest for this month, Bishop Alan. He's the bishop here in East Anglia, so he's our bishop, and we're very happy to welcome him to our studio here on First Fridays. Welcome, Bishop Alan.
Thank you very much indeed, Kieran. Thank you for inviting me.
You're very welcome. We're really glad to have you, and you're our first guest to be live in the studio with us rather than via Zoom, so that's really great.
Good. Yeah.
So, on First Fridays, we like to talk to people a little bit about their story, about sort of their journey of faith. And so, clearly you're a bishop. You've been bishop in East Anglia for how long now?
I've been bishop for 7 years. 7.5 years.
Yes, quite some time.
It'll be 8 years next July if I make it.
Yeah. And were you a bishop before you were a bishop here in East Anglia?
I was a bishop, auxiliary bishop in Westminster for 10 years.
Okay.
So in fact, I celebrate my 18th anniversary of being a bishop on January the 24th next year.
Okay, so not far away then.
Not far away.
So, growing up, was faith always a part of your life? Was it always important to you?
Yes, not that I realised that it was, but I think in those days I was brought up in the late 40s and early 50s, as it were, and we all went to Sunday school and so on because I haven't always been a Catholic. So I went to Sunday school. I was sent there by my parents, and I was used to going every week. But it wasn't really until one of my primary school teachers, whose husband was an organist and choir master in one of the city churches in Oxford, she invited us to think about joining the choir at the church. I went back and spoke to my parents and they gave me permission to do so. So I started going to the choir practice and to the services in the church. Holy Cross Church, beautiful medieval church in the centre of Oxford. And it was there, I think, that I began to have the simmerings of faith and understand that there was something quite sort of mysterious about going to church, and I wasn't really quite sure what it was, but I realised after 3 years, I said something to the vicar in these or similar words. I think I'd rather like to be one of you when I've grown up. Yeah. So he said, maybe you will be. So, yeah.
Okay. And so was that kind of the beginnings of thinking about
priesthood? It was the beginnings. Well, that was certainly the beginnings. And I don't think I've ever wavered, apart from periods when perhaps other things have sort of got in the way and so on. But I had a sort of bit of a time out when I was about 15, 16, but not for very long.
Right.
So, yeah.
And so you finished school, and then what did you do after that? Did you go straight into training? Or something?
Yes, after that I went to University King's London. I did a year's teaching before I went up so I could get some money. In those days you didn't have big grants that were given to you,
sure.
That were loans. So I had to get some money for myself, which I did in that year, and then went to King's College in London and studied theology there. But before that I had to go to a selection conference, an Anglican selection conference, where I was taken on board. Yeah.
And what do you think it was that sort of drew you, that really made you think, this is really what I want to do by that stage in life? Was it what were your kind of motivation?
I didn't think I could answer that when I was sort of 10 years old. But afterwards, I think, when you look back across your life, you see various signposts, and sometimes those signposts are people, and certainly I came across some wonderful priests, Anglican priests, who guided me and fed me and encouraged me, and I was smitten by their example, their example of pastoral care and spirituality and so on.
That's the case for so many people, isn't it? That you see people who you look up to in all sorts of walks of life that kind of help you to see that faith is something really important and real. So you were a priest in the Church of England for quite some time, and then in the 1990s you became a Catholic.
Yes.
And so what drew you to the Catholic Church in particular?
Well, I think I need to go back again to my youth, as it
Yeah.
were. But when I was about 12 years old, still in Oxford, that was before we moved back to London, my mother asked me to go around the corner to get some bread for supper. And of course, in those days, you could go around the corner to a bakery where they had made wonderful bread. So I came back clutching my loaf, and this is quite extraordinary, really. And I think this was a real turning point in vocation and so on. Where I went to school, in the primary school, there was a Catholic church at the top end. And I had to walk past the church as I came back. And as I passed, suddenly the doors opened and this, what I know now, of course, was a Corpus Christi procession came out. And I was spellbound. I just stood there and watched, and it went round the grounds of the church, because in those days they didn't quite go right out. And I watched it, and it suddenly went back into the church, and the doors closed, and everybody else was in, and I was left standing with my bread. Well, it's quite a dramatic moment when you look back, and I just think, my goodness, I went off to get bread, but I actually saw the bread of life in procession, you know. And I think that's began to pull me towards the Catholic Church even then. When I was slightly older, I went to Lourdes on pilgrimage with a good Catholic family, and I was just taken aback by that too, the celebration, and to see the whole of the church present, so in different languages. I was very English. I don't think I'd left Oxford by that stage, and I'd gone to various places in England, but never abroad. That was a magnificent moment. And it was then that I actually said to the priest chaplain, I'd like to be a Catholic. And he taught me through it. And he just said, well, I can see your heart is already a Catholic. I think you should wait until your mind becomes a Catholic. And then you'll become a firm Catholic. So I was disappointed, but nevertheless went on with the Anglican training and so on. But he was right, absolutely right. If I'd come over, it would have been an emotional thing, emotional reaction to Lourdes, really, I think. As I got older, I learnt far more about the Catholic faith and its teaching. I need to go on, really. It's quite a long story, if you don't mind.
That's fine, please do.
But because certainly at that time when I was ordained as an Anglican, the ecumenical movement had begun. That thinking that Christians needed to see what brought them together, what drew them together, rather than the things that parted us. And it was a particular moment when Michael Ramsey went to meet the Pope, Pope Paul VI, and Pope Paul VI gave him a ring, an episcopal ring. Michael Ramsey never forgot that.
And just so that people watching know, Michael Ramsey was the Archbishop of Canterbury
yes, he
at
was
the time,
the Archbishop of Canterbury.
So he was the leader of the Church of England.
So it's quite extraordinary. You know, there'd been a meeting once since the Reformation, that was with his predecessor, but it was a very brief moment, and this was a much more formal meeting with the Pope. Over those next 2 decades, Anglicans who were in the sort of the Catholic way in the Church of England truly believed that there would be unity, and the two churches would come together. They were coming together. There were a lot of agreed statements in those days and so on. And when Pope John Paul II came to England on his pilgrimage, which was a high moment, and met the then Archbishop of Canterbury in Canterbury Cathedral, and they brought the Book of the Gospels out that St Augustine brought with him when he came to convert the English, sent by Pope Gregory. we just thought it was in the bag,
Yeah,
really,
yeah.
that we would walk together. I found in that decade, in the 1980s, the Church of England really went back on that moment and began to go its own way, both with regard to moral theology, with ordained ministry, and all sorts of things. And there was a question of authority, which came up. So I was on the road, I think, then to becoming a Catholic. But it took me all my strength of will and so on to do so. So I wasn't received until the 1990s, early 1990s. But then I felt I'd come home and wondered why I hadn't done it 30 years before.
There's so many people say that, they describe it as coming home to the Catholic Church, don't they?
Yeah.
So you must have spent a few years being a Catholic priest, and then you would have been asked at some point to become a bishop. What was that like?
Well, that's quite extraordinary. I mean, I thoroughly enjoyed being a priest. I'd always been as a vicar, I'd been a parish priest, always working in the parish setup, because I think that's where the mission really is, the people of God and beyond. So I was very pleased. I'd always been in rather challenging situations in the Church of England. Very good, Tottenham, big GLC estate in Colindale, and when I became a Catholic, I was sent off to Kensington High Street, which wasn't quite the same as Tottenham.
Different,
and then they appointed me as the parish priest of Chelsea, which is even further afield. But a beautiful church, Holy Redeemer, and St Thomas More. And I blame St Thomas More for praying for me to bring me through into the Church of England, because I've always had a really soft spot for him as a saint. So it was a wonderful thing. Then suddenly all this happened, and it came out of the blue, 2003, just before Christmas. In fact, I was told the day before Christmas Eve. Which rather ruined Christmas that year. Well, it upset Christmas in a way, because I wasn't able to tell anybody.
Oh, right, okay. So it's secret.
It wasn't going to be given out till, I think it was January the 8th or 9th or 10th.
Oh, okay, so you had to sort of keep it completely
so
secret for a couple of weeks.
Yes, that's right, yeah.
And is it like a sort of phone call? Do they ring you up?
No, the nuncio asked me to go across, and I had to see him. And I think if I hadn't have been sitting down, I would have had to have sat down when he told me that the Pope had appointed me as an auxiliary bishop of Westminster. I was very taken aback. I didn't realise that was going to happen. I was one of the vicars general in the Westminster diocese, and I thought the nuncio had asked me to go across to talk about various cases that the vicars general have to deal with. I thought actually I got something wrong, because I'd had to send some documentation off to Rome, but not at all.
Turns out you weren't in trouble, you were actually being made a bishop.
Yes, quite.
So
it was extraordinary.
Then, so you were in Westminster
Huge privilege.
And so you were in Westminster for about 10 years then? And
10 years auxiliary.
Then you became bishop here of East Anglia?
Yep.
And we're very grateful to have you.
2013, thank you. I'm delighted that I'm here.
And so what do you, in your day-to-day life as kind of Bishop of East Anglia, what kinds of things, what things do you most enjoy doing as sort of diocesan bishop?
I like to get out of my house and away from the desk. I love visiting parishes, and I love visiting schools. And within the parishes, of course, if I'm going on a visitation, I would go to a hospital or a prison or whatever. So it's really being amongst the people and so on. I love being in the parishes and so on. I suppose that goes back to being a parish priest.
Sure.
I'm just a big parish priest, really. But one of the great privileges is that we've got 11 prisons in the diocese. And that is a huge privilege to be able to go and visit the prison, say mass, meet the residents, and speak with them, and also hear their confessions and so on. So that's a very that's a very powerful moment in my ministry. Yeah.
And are there any, so that's what you liked about being a bishop, are there any things that you, sort of your least favourite things about being a bishop, things that you miss, you can't do? Or?
My desk and all the letters that come across, all the emails, loads and loads and loads of them every day, but have to be responded to. Sometimes they take a long time to respond to, people don't understand. But if you're out and about, it's very difficult to get everything done, as people would like.
But you clearly enjoy, and you're looking forward to retiring not too distant future.
Yes,
is that right?
I'm not sure when that's going to happen, but I think it will probably happen in 2021. And just as we're not told that we're going to be made a bishop until the moment comes, we're not actually told when we're allowed to retire until the moment comes.
So waiting on it and waiting.
So there's a waiting on it. Yes.
We get to enjoy your company for a bit longer then.
Yes. Well, thank you very much. I love being here, and that's why I'm going to retire in the diocese and live here. Fantastic. I think I thought when I left London I would never get used to it.
It must be very different.
Very, very different. Especially where I live, because I'm really at the end of nowhere, as it were. Very dark and very quiet. So for the first 6 months I was terrified of any noise that I heard in the house or whatever. But I've got used to it and I love it. Now when I go to London, I can't wait to get back to East Anglia. So.
Oh, fantastic. Well, that's actually all we've got time for this, but thank you very much for speaking with us, and yes, we look forward to seeing you perhaps again in the new year at some of our events.
Thank you. And I wish my blessing and good wishes to all who watch the video.
Thank you.